But I did go up to him one day and I said, Ole, let me ask you something. He said, what? I said, when are you going to put me out there on commentary? He said, can you do commentary? I said, hell yeah, I can do commentary. He said, all right, you start next week. Just like that. Hell, if I'd have known that, I'd asked him like 2 months earlier. And he stuck me out there. And I stayed out there with Tony Schiavone, I guess, for a year and a half, maybe.
Was your contract renegotiated because you were then on commentary with WCW? Because I've heard that Jim Hurd really valued the commentators more than the wrestlers, financially speaking.
I didn't get along with Hurd. Let me tell you, I finally got a job with WCW, and Hurd took over. And I've never told the story. And then I called down there to get my date to start, and they said, well, you're not starting. I said, I'm not starting. I was supposed to start this month. Or said, no, that's been changed. I said, by who? They said, well, by Jim Hurd. I said, oh, I need to talk to him. Well, he's not in. And I called back every day. Call back, Jim Hurd, leave a message. Jim Hurd left a message. Jim Hurd. I called back for about, I don't know, I guess 10 days, I guess. Finally, I went to this lawyer friend of mine, and I said, can you do me a favor? He said, what? And I said, not charge me an arm and a leg. He said, what? I said, I want you to write Jim Hurd a letter at WCW. I want you to certify it. So they have to sign for it, which looks like that's kind of, troubling when you get a certified letter. And the lawyer wrote, hey, my name is so-and-so and so-and-so, and I represent Dutch Mantell. We're asking why was he canceled out when he had a job agreement with you. And he says, if this is not honored, we will be seeking more punitive action or legal action. The phone rang the next day. The next day after they got the letter, because when they sign, you get a note too. It says they signed for the letter. And once he got it, they called me and they said, oh, will you start here? And I started and lasted a year and a half. Never had a contract with them. I just had an agreement. And the agreement was, I tell you who I got the job with was Jim Barnett.
Oh, right.
Jim Barnett was there, and that's who I had the agreement with. And I guess Hurd asked him, and Jim said, oh, yes, I told that boy he could start. That's the way he talked. I told that boy he could start in July or something. But anyway, and the whole time I was in WCW, Hurd avoided me, always avoided me. He never even said hello to me because I had forced his hand, and he didn't like that. But that's a story that I've never told, and I'm telling it first right here on this show.
I'm so pleased you mentioned Jim Hurd, because I'd realised, I'd put this in the notes somewhere, that I'd never asked you about Jim Hurd in the 50-odd shows that we've done so far. Mm-hmm. While you were saying that, I was writing more contracts. So this was sort of the era of guaranteed contracts in WCW, wasn't it?
They were starting them. I don't know if everybody had one. I didn't have one.
Well, that's what surprised me.
Not that I recall. I may have had one. I don't know. But I didn't put a lot of faith into it because contracts in those days did not benefit the wrestler. They benefited the company. And my first contract I signed in WWF only guaranteed me $1,500 a year. I went, and of course, you hear about, they drawing these tremendous houses and they doing this and they doing that. And so when I actually read the contract, I went, well, my God, they own me. And they did. They owned the name. Not that I wanted the name anyway. It was Zeb Colter. It was Uncle Zeb then, Uncle Zeb. And not that I wanted that name anyway. And it was all kind of a bunch of terms that benefited WWF and didn't benefit me at all. And after I left, this is another thing I got pissed off about. After you leave the company, you can't work anywhere else for 90 days. But then they did rule against that. That's unconstitutional or it's illegal. And it is illegal, really. Because if somebody leaves the company and for 90 days they can't work for another wrestling company, how are they going to make a living? How are they going to pay their bills?
Well, they do pay you those 90 days, don't they?
No. They pay you up to the date you leave, unless your contract expires on that. They do now. But back then, no, they didn't.
Going back to Jim Hurd, because I'm fascinated with Jim Hurd. The pizza man, because he's just such an awful boss.
Cornette hated that son of a bitch. I just hated him. He was a pizza guy who I don't even know how he got the job. I really don't.
I can tell you, maybe to a point. Apparently, he used to be a channel manager, maybe in St. Louis back in the 60s. And I think that's where Jim Barnett knew him from. And then he went off to not manage a Pizza Hut, but become a bigwig at Pizza Hut somewhere in the line. And then I think it was Jim Barnett who brought Jim Hurd in. Correct me if I'm wrong, people, but I think that's the story. So you can blame Jimsy.
Well, he knew absolutely nothing about the pro wrestling business. He may have known a few legalities about contracts and stuff like that. But as far as knowing the wrestling business, listen, I've been in dressing rooms with guys that have been in the business for 20 years, and they still didn't know the business. I'm trying to learn the business, but yet I'm looking at a guy who's been in for 20 years. He doesn't really understand the business. I remember I was riding down the road with this guy one time, and he said, what you should do is get a gimmick. I said, get a gimmick? What do you mean? He said, I don't know, a mask or something, or do this and do that. And that's how you get ahead in this business. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying, well, why don't you get a gimmick? You've been in the business 20 years. If you've given me all this advice, why don't you have one? He just went out there as whoever he was and wrestled. So I'm saying, if you're going to give advice, live it. Don't just give it out. So I didn't put my stock in what he said anyway. Yeah, but Jim Hurd, highly, highly unqualified to be in any kind of entertainment business. But he did. What big idea did he come up with?
Oh, there were loads. The Ding Dongs, the Hunchbacks. There was one that never even made TV. Well, the Hunchbacks never made TV. There was one called the Gangsters or something, where they had fake guns and shot them into the crowd. That lasted one match, and that was on a house show. There was Oz. Kevin Nash received a couple of the classics. There was that Spider-Man rip-off. There was the Beetlejuice rip-off. Some of the absolute biggest steaming piles of creative wrestling shit of all time. What was your favourite of the of that era of the terrible characters?
Well, who came up with that was WWF. I can't remember the name of it now. But back in those days, I guess, give me a couple more and I'll tell you.
Oh, God.
Give me the ones you just gave me.
Ding Dong. You've got it. I mean, everyone says the Ding Dongs for the worst one that made it to TV. They were the ones all in orange and they rang a bell in the corner.
I'll pick that one.
Fine.
Because anything he come up with, I mean, it was... See, he had the wrong idea about the wrestling business. Like a lot of guys, I sit in the dressing room, and these guys, they're trying to tell me about the business. They didn't even know the business. See, how many people online think they know the business? Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. But I'm not one of them. That's why even when I do a show and I'm talking about what WWE has done and where they're going, I don't know where they're going. But I know where they can go because they open a lot of doors. And the more doors you open that you can go through, the more chances you'll pick the right one, or the creative team will pick the right one. But so, and I have seen this certain guys or tag teams on TV, and I immediately put in my head DOA, dead on arrival. Like the latest one for me was the Maximum Male Models. And I said immediately after I see them, I said, that's dead on arrival. I don't know what you can do with these guys, because nobody's going to, it was, I guess, supposed to be a comedy team, but they never got there. I mean, they wasn't even funny. So sometimes you can outthink yourself. A lot of creative teams do that and fall victim to it.